It's time. It is time. It's Friday, and it's something like the normal time when we crash open the doors of the Nutmeg Tavern, and everyone's welcome inside. You are welcome into the Nutmeg Tavern. Have a seat. Go to the bar. But there's nobody there right now. I guess it's self-serve. And we are here in the Nutmeg Tavern. We are live, and I'm your host, John Townsend. We're going to be talking about fun 18th century stuff today. I have other people that are on the other side of the time vortex making all the fun things happen. So chat, there's Lauren.
Hello.
And on the console is Ivy.
Hi, everybody.
And they're making sure all that technological wudger stuff works. So anyway, I have this great fun topic. Although I did want to say super thank you to the super chat of £5 from somebody in Sussex, but I couldn't figure out how to pronounce their name. So thank you for that. It looks like a lot of people are in the chat today from all over the place, all over the world. In fact, tuning in sometimes on the opposite side of the world, so they're watching in the morning, which is really, really weird for me to even just think about. So, but welcome in nonetheless. Lauren came to me with the idea of a topic. She said, let's talk about spring and things. And I immediately started doing the research. And of course, winter really is what popped into mind. And it's really funny because, we're all getting geared up for spring. It's going to be like, I don't know, here it's supposed to be 70 on Tuesday next week. But today it's snowing. So this is a perfect episode. It's the what's going on at the end of winter, or, some of that wintry kind of stuff. And while I was researching that, I found a book that I really hadn't spent very much time reading at all. So I've got this giant list of basically like 1,200 favorites in my archive.org site. So it's like all these books. And whenever I'm like, I wonder what I want to talk about, I just basically scroll through that and I'll find like 100 different things that might be interesting, and I'll finally kind of lock it in on one. And published in the early 19th century is a book by Alexander Henry. And he was born in 1739 and he died in 1824. And during the French and Indian War, so 1760s, he is engaged, his job at the time was sort of a trader. So we're talking about somebody who's 21 years old, something like that. And he gets in charge of the goods inside of 3 big boats that are traveling from one fort to another. So basically the British were kind of moving along toward the end of the French and Indian War, moving from one place to another, and they're trying to move goods from one fort to another. There's a big whole bunch of boats, and this guy's in charge of 3 of them. Apparently he does a really bad job because they crash, they sink. He almost dies. He's like on top of one of them, like, help me, and he gets rescued by people. Apparently, maybe it wasn't his fault necessarily. I mean, they were going down rapids and all kinds of crazy things. So, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt on that. But he's not really part of the military necessarily. He's just, the people transporting goods. He's from a family of traders, and he decides that it would be a really good idea to take a bunch of trading goods from where he's based out of, which is Albany, New York, and go back into this area that is being worked on, different forts and whatnot. He travels with a bunch of goods. He gets to a particular fort. He doesn't get to the one he really wants to. Winter kind of socks in, and he gets he ends up selling all his stuff, so it doesn't really matter. But he really finds out that what he really wants to do is go to Michilimackinac. So basically Mackinac Island. There's a fort there, and apparently the Native Americans really want to trade there, and it's like one of the best places to go. So he hires a voyageur person to be a guide, and they start to travel back to get more goods, but it's still wintertime, and he just has adventure after adventure. So, him and the Native American guy, or him and the voyageur person, they stop at a particular Native American village, and he's assured that everything is going to be safe, and let's just say, alcohol was involved, and just everything breaks loose. He flees for his life. The voyageur finally catches up with him, and they stay at another spot. And one thing after another happens. After they're traveling a little bit further, they're basically stranded. They really need to get going further. It's winter still, and they find an abandoned birch bark canoe, and the voyageur's like, yeah, we fixed this up, and we're gonna go down the river. And of course, he's already had his adventures in the river with boats, but they do that, and 2 hours later, the boat is half full of water, and he's just scared to death, and he finally gets out of the canoe and says, I'm never going to get in that boat again. And of course, the voyageur person's like, well, we are on an island, so you're going to have to get into it again. So he picks up the canoe, and he has a lot of fun, crazy adventures, and some not so fun. He does end up taking trading goods up further, but he gets a trading license from the General Gage, I believe, who is sort of in charge of the British at the time. He gets a license to trade, but the general is not happy with where he wants to go. He really doesn't have control over the spot where he wants to go, but he goes anyway. And he ends up getting captured by Native Americans, and he kind of stays with the Native Americans like a year or something, sort of adopted into the tribe. Many of them, the case wasn't nearly so kind. So many things happen to him, but he does explain certain things as he's going along that really give us a hint about what it's like in that Michigan, Lower Canada area in the 1760s, and how the Europeans are, how they're dealing with things, and also how the Native Americans are. So let me read this section here. So one of the things I thought was very interesting is at one point they go out. He goes out to make maple sugar with the people in the area. I don't know if this is when he's really not necessarily like totally engaged in the Native American tribes at this point, but this is earlier than that. He says the season for making maple sugar is at hand, which of course it is here right now. And shortly after my arrival at the Sault, which is Sault Ste. Marie, I removed with the other inhabitants to a place at which we were to perform the manufacture. A certain part of the maple woods having been chosen, and which was distant about 3 miles from the fort, a house 20 feet long and 14 feet broad was begun in the morning. Before night, it was made fit for the comfortable reception of 8 people. So,
that was
in one day, they're putting this together. But they're going to explain it here. It says it was open at the top. So, it was just 4 walls. It had a door at each end and a fireplace in the middle running the whole length. So basically, is 4 walls and a fire pit that goes along the center of it all the way along. The next day was employed in gathering the bark of white birch trees with which to make vessels to catch the wine or sap. So we would call it sap today. The trees were now cut or tapped, and spouts or ducts introduced into the wound. The bark vessels were placed under the ducts, and as they filled, the liquor was taken out and in buckets and conveyed into reservoirs or vats of moose skin.
Whoa. Each
vat containing 100 gallons. And from these, we supplied the boilers, of which we had 12 of from 20 to 25 gallons each, with fires constantly under them day and night. While the women collected the sap and boiled it and completed the sugar, the men were no less busy in cutting wood, making fires, and in hunting and fishing in part of our supply of food. The earlier part of spring is that best adapted to making maple sugar. The sap runs only in the day, and it will not run unless there has been a frost in the night, when in the morning there is a clear sun and the night has left ice of the thickness of $1, silver dollar. The greatest quantity is produced. So he's explaining that you got to have the weather kind of go up and down. It can't get too cold. On the 25th day of April, our labor ended. So our maple sugar season ends a lot earlier than that. So, and we returned to the fort, carrying with us, as we found by the scales, 1,600 weight of sugar, and we had besides 36 gallons of syrup. And during our stay in the woods, we certainly consumed 300 weight. Though as I have said, we hunted and fished, yet sugar was our principal food during the whole month of April. I have known Indians to live wholly upon the same and become fat. You imagine, I mean, they are just gorging on sugar the entire time.
Well, and they're working hard, so.
But I can imagine they were just sick and tired of sugar by
that's
the
true.
end of it.
Probably were.
One more maple sugar cake and I'm gonna barf.
So, Dwayne Wolotka, who I believe lives in Camden, so is probably familiar with it, was wondering how they dealt with the windy conditions. So, here you are in the wintertime if there's no shelter around. And you had talked a bit about their shelter, but we also have another picture of one where they did create kind of a snow shelter that's kind of braced up. I don't know if you can find that particular picture, Ivy. Which one? It's probably, that one? Yes, that one.
Yes, so we see references here about these sort of dugouts, basically, and this is probably an area, I don't know that they basically, it kind of implies possibly on the right-hand side here that those are turf pieces that were dug out, but not necessarily true. It could be just a natural kind of dip in the ground, and they just used that and made this sort of quick wooden hut out of large pieces of bark, or those are probably pieces of bark, even though they look like boards. That would be my guess. In fact, it kind of seems like it's implying chunks of bark here
That's true.
On the ground.
That might be what those are.
So they're probably strips of birch bark. That's fairly thick, and I do have some references here where he talks about them making birch bark canoes and the bark that they're working with. A lot of times we see birch bark and it's really thin, but he mentions birch bark being 1/4 of an inch thick.
I wonder if it's because their trees were older, or
I don't know exactly.
or maybe because it's colder
the reference,
there, because
exactly.
we're really on the edge of where birch can grow.
And we're working with something like paper birch,
Yes.
whereas they're probably a different birch bark. So maple sugar is a big part of the industry, even in the inventory of the fort at Fort Wayne, which is just east of here, 30 miles, in 1809 or something like that. Maybe it was 1811. Maple sugar was one of the inventory items that they traded for. So things went out and things went in, and hides came in, of course, but sugar was another one of those items that was traded for. And I believe in the Bark Covered House, William Nolan's book in Michigan, he talks about maple sugar. So another item that we see referenced over and over in this area, whether it's Michigan or Lower Canada or different spots where there's winter. One of the big things that's happening is the hunting during the winter season. So a lot of places, the rest of the year you're worried about farming. You can't do any kind of farming in the wintertime. So hunting is hunting is the perfect thing to do at winter, and for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons is that, of course, you can deal with the meat. It gets frozen, and so you don't have to, worry about the meat going bad really, really rapidly. You also have snow on the ground, which can help you track the animals and make it harder for them to get away from you. So here is a section where he's talking about hunting in this 1760 time period. And he's probably still in sort of upper Michigan. He says, February in the country and by the people there and among whom I was is called, I know that's a hard to understand sentence, but this time, February, is called the moon of hard or crusted snow. For now the snow can bear a man, or at least dogs, in the pursuit of animals of the chase. At this season, the stag is very successfully hunted. He really means just deer. His feet breaking through at every step, and the crust upon the snow cutting his legs with sharp edges to the very bone. He is consistently in distress and easy prey, and it frequently happened that we killed 12 in the space of 2 hours. By this means, we were soon put into provision of 400 or 4,000 weight of dried venison, which was to be carried on our backs along with the rest of our wealth for 70 miles. So he's talking about traveling. It would be able to hunt a deer easily, and then even in this kind of weather, dry out the venison so that they would be able to use it as a provision. And dried meat, whether it's buffalo or in this case deer, is one of those highly desirable products for trading. It's one of those things that they could produce in a place that didn't have a lot of salt. So they're in an area where you can't make salt pork, salt beef, whatever. So you're going to just dry that meat out. He does many times talk about using snowshoes. And in at least one circumstance, they were traveling from the area of the burned out Fort Sault Ste. Marie to kind of trying to get back to Michilimackinac, and he was traveling with somebody else who wasn't acquainted with using snowshoes. Snowshoes. They'll figure it out. Anyway, he was traveling with somebody who wasn't acquainted with using snowshoes. He had already had a lot of experience with that, and the traveling was very, very difficult for this person who was not used to using snowshoes. There we go. And there are a couple of different references. I think even Matthew Patton talks about making or redoing snowshoes, but it figures they figure prominently in this book, because without them, you really just can't get anywhere. There is one great circumstance, though, where he is going on a long travel. I think it was after the canoe incident where he was in the canoe that kept sinking, and they were really worried about getting someplace. They were in winter and they didn't really have enough provisions, and then they spy in the distance a sledge being drawn. He doesn't say drawn by what. It was probably drawn by horses, but who knows? It could have been dogs. I figured if it was dogs, he would have said something. Anyway, they sort of flag this guy down who's in the sledge, and he bargains with him to take him to the next fort, and boom, he was there. It's like, wow, it's
Should have done that earlier.
Should have done, yeah. Why didn't I figure out this like a whole lot earlier? Let me see. There was another really, really interesting section. And I thought I had it here, and now I can't necessarily find it. Maybe not everything printed like I wanted it to print. What's new? He talks about doing the trading, and he says, I furnished, in this particular instance, I furnished with merchandise on credit. The prices were for a stroud blanket, the kind you would sort of wear over your shoulders, 10 beaver skins. For a white blanket, 8 beaver skins. A pound of powder was 2 beaver skins. A pound of shot or a ball was 1. A gun was 20. An axe of 1 pound weight was 2 beaver skins. A knife was 1 beaver skin. A beaver, it will be remembered, was worth at Michilimackinac 2 shillings and 6 pence a pound. In the currency of that place, that is 6 livres or $1. Anyway, so about a beaver is about $1, and then a silver dollar, and then all those things kind of. Now Lauren had a slide here of this is 1715, and the what things trade for.
Yeah, I believe this is the Hudson Bay Company, and so the governor has kind of set,
Right.
You're like, when you're trading furs, and off to the left there's the furs, and then off to the right there's what they would correspond to in what the items are. So they have, what would a moose be? What would a muskrat be? What would a deer be? And then what are you trading for? Are you trading for flints? Are you trading for, sugar?
Kettles, yeah.
Vermilion, I think, was on the list.
Yeah, vermilion. Sugar, hard soap, hatchets, knives. So it's almost readable. I'm not sure how to kind of figure out the calculation of. There's something that says 13, but I can't read what it is. Anyway, it was one of those. It's like. The money really didn't mean much. It was basically things were priced by the number of hides. Like, how much does that knife cost? That's a beaver hide. How much does that axe cost? That's 2 beaver hides. They didn't really have. That was the money of the time frame. He does give us there is a time when he needs to disguise himself. So he ends up going to this fort, and because the Native Americans and everybody else has been dealing with the French all this time, and they've just come out of a war or not quite finished with a war where they were at war with the British, and him being British, he decides that he's best to disguise himself and not identify himself as English or British because nobody likes him. Nobody. In fact, they're trying to kill him. So at one point, he disguises himself as a Canadian, as it were, or a voyageur. And then he gives us the description of what he changes into. I want to do it assimilating myself as much as I was able to their appearance and manners, and to this end I laid aside my English clothes and covered myself only with a cloth passed about the middle, a shirt hanging loose, a molton or blanket coat, and a large red milled worsted cap. The next thing was to smear my face and hands with dirt and grease. This being done, I took the place of one of my men, voyageurs, and when the Indians approached, used the paddle with as much skill as I possessed. I had the satisfaction to find that my disguise enabled me to pass several canoes without attracting the smallest notice. So get a kind of an idea about what so a lot of these pictures are just Native Americans we're seeing here, but the voyageurs and the French at the time period really adopted a lot of the clothing that the Native Americans were using, and probably because it was practical.
Much
clothing,
better suited for the
right?
environment.
He's like, well, yeah, you might want to look like an English guy, but if you want to be able to travel in the areas that we're traveling, then you're going to wear, the same kind of clothing. And if we read in the journal, of course, Nicholas Creswell, he ends up kind of doing the same thing. And everyone does when they go out into the frontier. They're like, well, okay, these clothes, these shoes, whatever it is, really aren't practical in the places where we're going. So we're gonna kind of adapt into the clothing. He does spend some time here talking about the canoes, and I thought it was interesting. He talks about them making the canoes, but he also talks about them manning the canoes. So the canoes are worked not with oars but with paddles, occasionally with a sail, which is kind of interesting. To each canoe there are 8 men, and to every 3 or 4 canoes, which constitute a brigade, there is a guide or conductor. Skillful men at double the wages of the rest are placed in the head and the stern. They engage to go from Montreal to Michilimackinac and back to Montreal again. The middlemen at 150 livres and the end men at 300 livres each. The guide has the command of his brigade and is answerable for all the pillage and loss. And in return, every man's wages is answerable to him. This regulation was established under the French government. The freight of a canoe of the substance and dimensions which I have detailed consists in 60 pieces or packages of merchandise, of the weight of from 90 to 100 pounds each, and the provisions to the amount of 1,000 weight. In this is to be added the weight of 8 men and of 8 bags weighing 40 pounds each, probably the men's personal bags, each of which every man is privileged to put on board. The whole weight must therefore exceed 8,000 pounds, or perhaps be averaged at 4 tons. So we're talking about a canoe that he talks about earlier here is about 33 feet long and about 4.5 feet wide, carrying 8 tons of, or 4 tons, 8,000 pounds of goods. And the packages here are consisting of 60 pieces weighing from 90 to 100 pounds each. They break it down like that because at times they have to stop, carry the canoe across the land, and they have to carry all those goods. So they're broken down into these packages that you can carry 2 each. Can you imagine? Like 180 to 200 pounds. Maybe you're carrying 1, but I think they're carrying 2. Anyway, you got to carry the canoe, and then you got to carry your 8,000 pounds of stuff. And some of those portages were for miles. It wasn't just like 50 feet. You got to carry it. It's like, oh, you got to go 4 miles down that way and over that hill, and and you're carrying this 8,000 pounds in a boat that is made out of this little thin wood stuff.
Well, and it makes you think about how important the rivers were to them, their movement, because they needed them. You couldn't have carried that across.
It was the only way. Now, and this going from Montreal to Michilimackinac, you're going on big lakes. So, you're not in just like little rivers where you're 20 feet from the land all the time. You're on a big lake, possibly with big weather. Some of those lakes can have pretty crazy weather. So, amazing sort of traveling that they're doing. Let's see. There's a description here that I apparently didn't write down, but one of the things I thought was fascinating, I think it was a question on a live stream, I'm not sure, that long ago, which was about ice fishing. So he really spends, at one point, he is at a fort, and the food is expensive. And he talks about here the canoe, the voyageurs that he is referencing here. Their main provision is a kind of cornmeal, basically hominy or whatever, pounded up. Probably that stuff that's sort of parched and then ground up, and it's mixed with fat. That's it, an oil basically, and that's their only real provision. They don't carry anything else. Not salt pork, none of those things. It's just, and he talks about them being out like that run, the amount of time that they would be gone, that they had to take provisions was 14 months. And it's like, it's very, very crazy to imagine. But anyway, he is at a particular fort at one time. The only real provision that's available is cornmeal. It's very expensive. So he's surviving upon fish that he catches in the wintertime. And he does that by ice fishing. And he'll have multiple different holes and multiple different, basically, reels that are in the water. And he said, I catch all the fish I needed to survive upon, no problem at all. Later on, he also describes the ice fishing that they do after the fort at Sault Ste. Marie burns down. They stay in one little building. Most of the garrison and stuff left to go to Michilimackinac. He and some other people stay in this one little house, and they survive on fish. And because he had dried fish earlier, but a lot of his dried fish burnt up when the rest of the fort burnt up. And but they build a little house or shack on the ice, and then they have a bigger hole, and instead of using hooks and a line, they spearfish through a large hole in the ice. And they use a lure that's made out of wood, and I think he said lead, probably on a string, lures the bigger fish in, and then because their little house is over the hole in the ice, they can see at a great depth, and they're able to spearfish and survive on the fish that they catch that way. So multiple references to ice fishing in the 1760 context here in Michigan. So thought that was just fascinating to see that. Now, undoubtedly, those fishing techniques, especially the spear fishing technique, is adapted from the Native Americans. What was happening with the fish hooks and that, I do not know, whether that's a sort of a hybrid technique of the Europeans or in the Native Americans, or whether the Native Americans were doing that too. Remember, this is a region where it's close to, and he mentions, I think, in at least one place, copper being sort of naturally available on the ground. They would find, there's a copper area. And it wasn't copper that needed to be smelted, it was native copper. And it's working that kind of metal into a fish hook is probably fairly easy to do. So, I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, fascinating.
You want to break for a
yes.
moment? Okay.
Don't take a breath.
Okay, so I have a couple new members, so Nerf Bullets and Vin C. Maybe they might be on your list. And then we have a super chat from Bloodwire Radio with all these early forms of preserving meat and without modern and common freezing methods. How common was food poisoning?
I can only imagine that their guts were a lot stronger than ours, because I really don't hear too much about it. Now, they may not have written about it and thought that it was because of the food, because people just got sick and died all the time.
Right, and a lot of food poisoning, it feels like other things. Like the symptoms are similar to other illnesses.
Right, and since they were eating strange things all the time, they may not have just, kind of recognized it as necessarily being the food bad. Sometimes they would eat food and they would just say, well, that's, sort of foreign, or they might blame all kinds of things on the food. They just really didn't have this connects to that, like we do. And even today, people get sick and they never figure out, was it something I ate? Was it something I did? Was it some strange whatever? It's just people get sick. And it was so much more true in the 18th century. So I don't know how to guess if they, how big of a problem that really was, because we just don't have
Because
a
while
lot
they
of-
talk about being sick, they don't normally connect it with the food.
Exactly.
But even though, like, I'm pretty sure salad was suffered.
It was that 14-month-old deer carcass I ate,
Okay, so here's a super chat from Layla Lover 90. Hails from the Nutmeg State. Can you please say hi to my wife Layla? She introduced me to your channel.
Hello, Layla. Thank you for introducing people to this very strange place on the internet.
A fun place to hang out on a Friday evening. Okay, and then I have a question. Somebody was wondering, had you run across them mentioning treating frostbite? Or him talking about that?
Not much. I mean, I think it's classic that they would do things like rub snow on it, but I don't. I'd have to look hard for that. I didn't see any references recently in anything I've read, but I'm sure that obviously it was a thing. And again, it may not be one of those things they bothered to talk about. It's like, oh, lost 3 fingers, meh, whatever.
This one is somebody was thinking about making mead. They just got a mead making kit. They were wondering if you had any mead making tips, but I don't think it's something you've made yet.
No, I have not made mead. There are mead recipes in the time period, but they're basically holdovers from the 17th century that go into the 18th century. So I don't have any great mead making tips. There are definitely some. There's even it's the mead book of the 18th century. But I have not done that, so I don't have any great tips on that.
I was going to put The Closet Opened in because I think that's the book that has,
Exactly.
it's early.
Right. It's
very early.
1665, I think.
Right? And he has quite a bit about meat in it. Okay, so this was wondering if you had watched the movie, I'm trying to read my handwriting, I believe it's Hundreds of Beavers.
No.
But I hadn't heard about it.
Sounds good, though.
It does. Who doesn't like a beaver?
Yeah, there are some, there's like The Robe, and there's some other movies that kind of cover the 17th and 18th century in that area, and they're pretty brutal. I mean, it's tough.
Somebody was looking around for a venison recipe, and they were looking in 18th century cookbooks and realized they didn't have a lot of venison recipes, and they were wondering if you knew the reason behind it.
The cookbooks are generally for people in more urban settings and not so much game cookery. A lot of people ask about game cooking, and there's just not as much that's printed. There are some specifics, hare and rabbit recipes, and some venison recipes. I think in Hannah Glass, she says something like how to recover stinking venison. It's like, well, this has gone bad, right?
I can't say that it made me want to
No, exactly. It's
try
like,
it out.
I don't need to use this technique. But speaking of people getting sick on rotten meat, but so yeah, I'm not sure, the reason other than the fact that it's just not a real common ingredient to be able to get hold of.
Because it's probably still restricted in England at the time.
Exactly.
The deer are the king's deer, probably. And
Too true.
And we don't have a lot of cookbooks from USA for the 18th century. So
Exactly.
we just don't have a lot yet. Okay, so this one was wondering, she was wondering about in the pictures, a couple of the people have the ties wrapped around the legs, on the lower leg right below the knee, and then she was wondering about that.
So what they're wearing there are typically called leggings. it keeps in a. You'll see them if you watch some of the videos where you actually see my lower legs, and I'm out in the cabin. I'm usually wearing leggings. Nicholas Cresswell talks about them basically wrapping pieces of cloth like blanketing or wool around their lower legs and then tying it on there. Not only does it keep your lower leg like nice and warm, and I'm the kind of person who's always cold and is like, I would wear them every day if I thought I could get away with it, because they do keep your lower leg and your feet nice and warm because all that blood flow and everything. But the reason why Nicholas Cresswell talked about them wearing them is because of snakes, because snakes can't bite through all that fabric. So, but he's in Kentucky and places where there are a lot more snakes. I don't think there's quite as many when you're up north like that. But keeps your leg warm, protects it from all sorts of things. If you can imagine, a lot of these people, at least the Europeans, are wearing knee breeches. So the only thing underneath their knee is socks, which is just not
and
appropriate.
You don't want your socks to get ripped up.
Right, you don't want your socks to get ripped up, and socks just don't keep your legs warm. Like you want something else there.
So I have a super chat from Max Harkle. Please tell us about 18th century superpowers one can get from consuming mass quantities of maple syrup, asking for a friend.
I think it's diabetes that they're getting. I can't imagine kind of surviving on like they're hummingbirds or something. I don't know.
Ivy would be able to do it.
Yeah.
Just subsisting on maple syrup.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, the eating habits are going to be pretty strange, right? So, can you imagine you're surviving on, deer meat, bear fat, and sugar? It's like, whoo!
I bet they were happy to head somewhere and have a fire cake or something.
So at one point he is with the Native Americans, and they want to go out hunting this. They know there's this big bear in this tree, and it's like part of winter time, and so they decide they're going to cut down this giant hollow tree, and they whack at this tree with little tiny axes for like a day and a half, and it finally falls down, and the bear comes out, and it's all mad, and they tell him to shoot it. So he shoots the bear. And then they run up to the bear and it's like, oh, bear, we're so sorry we killed you. But we didn't really do it. He did it. They're trying to make up with the bear spirit and put it all on him because it's like... Anyway, the poor guy. It's a really good story, though. And it's very entertaining to read. Every week we try to get to brand new Patreon and YouTube members. I only have new and renewing YouTube members this week. Shelley Medford, Chad Parkhouse, Vin C, Nerf Bullets, Deacon Dale, Lou Cole, and Rachel Bean, and someone called Lupo. Thank you for your support of what we do here on the channel. One of the other things that people can do, because we like to have fun merch things, whether it's cool mugs or whatnot. But one of the new products, I'm trying to get them in focus here, Nutmeg Tavern playing cards. So the playing cards have the Nutmeg Tavern logo on them. And then on the other side there are playing cards that are designed off of 18th century playing cards. Now, we sell 18th century playing cards that are like 18th century playing cards in that they're made of uncoated cardstock with square corners and a blank back, and they're very difficult to play cards with. So we thought it would be fun to have merch playing cards that were modern playing cards, like you could actually play cards with, shuffle and all that good stuff. Have the fun Nutmeg Tavern thing on the back, and then a playable front. They don't have numbers or anything like that, so you actually have to count your pips. It's like, now what is it? Is that an 8? Yes, it's an 8. So it's not quite as easy, but you'll get used to it. The aces are just the plain single pip. sometimes in the 18th century, they had a special tax stamp that would go on top of the pip, so it would make the big single ace card. That's actually what we're used to, and that's based off of a tax stamp. Ours are untaxed. Look at that. No tax stamp on those guys. And fun face cards. These are actually based off of the images that are in Diderot's encyclopedia. We just basically blew those up, turned them into color, and there you go. So those are available on the website. As these will probably change a little bit over time because the packaging we haven't completely. We're working on the packaging, but they're available now in I think currently they'll go out in a little cloth bag, but we're working on something a little fancier for that. So those are available on the website if you're interested in having fun with cards and or supporting what we do here on the channel.
Okay, I have a super chat from Speed and Style Tony. Did they add nutmeg to all that maple sugar?
It's actually an interesting question in the idea of would they have nutmeg in the backwoods of whatever in 1760? Well, I was intrigued to find that they did have nutmeg in the inventory at the fort at Fort Wayne in 1809, which would have been in the kind of the frontier at the time. So who knows? They could have, but I doubt it. I'm sure they would have saved it for other situations.
Were you just checking to make sure it was okay to time travel to that area? Because you were just checking to make sure they had nutmeg?
I wanted to make sure that they had nutmeg there before I went.
Somebody was asking me if we had a live stream about playing cards. And we just
yes,
done
we do!
I'm going to put it in the chat.
Yes. The playing card episode was great. Great
Yes.
fun. So make sure to check that out. So let's see. We just did the bread marathon. So make sure if you missed it, I don't know, YouTube really didn't love the bread marathon much. But the bread marathon is out. That was released last Sunday. Episode coming up this Sunday is on what do you do with your trash in the 18th century? So, and that really turned out interesting. Fun episode, and we found a lot of great art to go in that episode, as well as fun B-roll from past episodes, as well as new stuff, and a lot of fascinating information there. So that'll be a great episode coming up.
Yes. Okay. I think. Yep. I think I'm all caught up.
Well. Let me see if there's a. So I was very intrigued by he actually kind of separates his book out into two segments. What happens in like 1760, 61, and then he comes and revisits the topic in the 1770s. So the book says something like Adventures 1760-1776 or something like that. 1776. But there's really kind of a big gap in the middle. The person's a fascinating character though, and not your kind of typical story. Somebody who's in a trading situation. He really is, trying to work with lots of different sets of people, and apparently, they got along with him. Most of the people that knew him didn't want to kill him. It was just other people that really wanted to kill him. And he really was in a lot of sort of dangerous situations. Again, a little like Nicholas Cresswell, sort of, the innocent in the woods, dangerous things happening all around him. And, he manages to survive. He's hunted a couple of different times and people have to hide him. When he's even with the Native Americans, they're like, there are times when they kind of shoo him off because it's like, well, you don't want to interact with these people. He ends up going with a delegation of Native Americans at the end of the French and Indian War, where the British are like, okay, we're in charge now, and let's just make peace and all that good stuff. And he kind of goes with that whole group, and then he's released basically from his captivity. He goes back with the Europeans instead of staying with the Native Americans. But he really doesn't seem to be. He's not worried about when he's captured by the Native Americans. He's really adopted by them, and he's not in any great concern for escaping, right? He's just it's like, well, okay,
This seems nice.
now that was nice. Now it's time to. It's a very interesting character about how he lives and works with that. Yeah, here's that food part where he says. This species of grain, corn, is prepared by boiling it in strong lye, after which the husk may be easily removed. It is next mashed and dried, and in this state it is soft and friable like rice. The allowance for each man on the voyage is a quart a day, and a bushel with 2 pounds of prepared fat is reckoned to be a month's subsistence. No other allowance is made of any kind, not even salt, and bread is never thought of. The men, nevertheless, are healthy and capable of performing their heavy labor. This mode of victualling is essential to the trade, which, being pursued at great distances and in vessels so small as canoes, will not admit of the use of any other food. If men were to be supplied with bread and pork, the canoes could not carry a sufficiency for 6 months, and the ordinary duration of the voyage is not less than 14. So, and this is 1760. So later on, as the technology of the day changes, they move to something like pemmican, which is even more dense, and of course, then they can travel even further with a smaller weight of provision. Yeah, it's just amazing to see what, and I can't imagine what their life would be like. They're just paddling all day long, carrying heavy loads. And then, sleeping and then getting up and doing it again and again for 14 months. There are other books if you're interested in some of the winter things going on. The Bark-Covered House in northern Michigan. He mentions things like a root cellar that his father does dig for overwintering potatoes so that they can survive. He mentions he spends a couple of chapters talking about hunting in the winter. He talks about apples specifically as a winter food, something they can have all winter long, and also about how difficult it was to keep the children with clothing, and many times the kids are barefoot all winter long. And that's in the Bark-Covered House. That's 1830s in Michigan, around Detroit. And the Diary of Matthew Patton. Really, we can, if you read the days of the month, and we can get into, it's like, here's what's happening in December and January and February. And you can really kind of see the shift. He doesn't talk about saying, oh, I'm doing this because it's winter, but all of a sudden everything shifts to indoor work. He does a lot of woodworking for other people and for himself in the wintertime because he can, kind of do that. He talks about logging in the winter, cutting firewood in the winter, and doing a lot of legal work. So he wrote sort of contracts and even like indictments or whatever. People would have legal battles with other people, and they'd need the idea, the problem written up, and he would be doing that sort of thing in the winter time also. So a couple of books that help give you a bit more idea about what winter life is like. Is that it? Are we there?
Yes.
Fascinating book. Check it out if you're interested. It's available on archive.org and is very fun and readable. It's a print that was done by Lakeside Press, which is actually part of Donnelly's. So that was done in like 1920, so it's a very, very readable print, right?
That's always
it's
nice.
Done in the 20th century, so it isn't one of those, I can't understand anything.
Why are all the F's?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not something that's difficult to read. Incredible. If you are interested, make sure to check out the playing card live stream, which we did. That was a fun one. And of course, all the other fun stuff like what's coming up on Sunday. And Ryan is working on a cheese episode. So we'll see. We'll see. We just did that cheese live
It'll
stream.
be here for spring.
Yeah. Yep. Want to thank everyone for their amazing, wonderful support on the channel, your comments and your encouraging comments in the chat, and of course your support by merch and Patreon and membership and super chat and all that good stuff. We could not function without you. There wouldn't be a reason to do what we do without you. So thank you so much for your care of us in those things. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Ivy. And thanks for watching.